And Tuval Kain saw something from the distance. He told his father Lamech to kill. And it ended up being, as we know, it ended up being Cain. And finally, Cain was Abel's blood was avenged by Cain being killed by mistake by his great grandson. In that story, we learned a fascinating Rashi yesterday. Lamech, after he killed his great grandfather by mistake, he smacked his hands together, and he ended up killing his son, who was the one leading him around, whose name was Tuval Kain. And when he got home, his wife didn't want to have anything to do with him. He said, "You murdered." By the way, Evan, are you recording? Evan?
Yes, I'm recording on the cloud.
Okay, good, perfect. He said that you murdered your great grandfather, and you also murdered our child, your own child. We don't want to be intimate with you anymore. Or they said another reason is they saw that God was going to wipe out the face of the earth, and also Adam was going to be punished, and therefore why should they have children if they'll end up being wiped out and end up being corrupt and so on. So they said, we're not having any more kids. The prophecy came true. It's 7 generations later. Cain was killed. Done. We're not having any more children. And so what was the husband supposed to do? What was Lamech supposed to do? His wives don't want to be with him anymore. So he went to Adam. If you had Adam alive, I guess that was a good idea to go to. They went to Adam, the first creation, the oldest man alive, the great grandfather. And they said, Adam, my wives don't want to be with me anymore. So Adam said, let me speak to them. And Adam said, listen, you're right. You have all these reasons not to be with your husband, especially you're scared your children will be wiped out and the descendants won't end up living. But you're not supposed to make those calculations. It's up to God. You have to have kids. God told you to have children and fill the earth. You need to have children. Whatever God decides to do, that's up to God. You're not in control. And they said to Noah, you're so funny. You didn't have any children after the sin of the golden calf. The only kids the sin of the tree of knowledge. The only kids you have was 2 children, right? Cain and Abel. And you decided you don't want to have any more kids. What about you? You're telling us we should have more kids. You yourself have not had more. So now, like, Adam had no choice, and his daughter-in-law put him in his place. And what did he do? He ended up having more children, and that's where today's Torah portion falls. And just to give you some idea where it comes in. So here we go. Follow along. Verse 25. Adam knew his wife again, was intimate with her again. But Teled Ben, and she gave birth to a son. But Tikra Shemai Shais, and she calls this son Shais. Now this is very important to know this, because Noah will be the only one to survive. Which of the children of Adam did Noah come from? He came from Shais, which means that I'm just thinking that also. Oh, actually, his wife Naamah came from one of the first 2 sons. I was going to mistakenly say actually today that the whole world came just from Shais, and there's nothing left of Cain and Abel. But I just remembered in yesterday's Chumash we learned that Naamah, Noach's wife, did come from a descendant from Cain. So the wife Abel was killed. I guess he had no children. Cain had a great granddaughter who married this new son, Shais, who had a great grandson who was going to be Noach, and the world was going to be created from those 2 people. Anyway, continue right along. So Adam has a 3rd son who's very significant. His name is Shais, because he's going to be the great grandfather of Noach. Kishas li Elokim zera acher. Why did he call him Shais? Because God gave me, and the word is God gave me another seed, another child. Achar techas hevel ki hargei Kain. After Abel killed Cain. So after Abel killed Cain, I still had a 3rd son. I had another son, and I still had a 3rd son after that, and that's why he named him the name Shais. So Adam is talking about his 3rd son that he's having. Ula Shais, and Rashi here tells us the whole story, which I started off with. Verse 26. Oh, you're going too fast. Oh no, you're good. Thank you. No, perfect. Ula Shais kam hu yolad bein. And then Shais had a son. We're going to go quickly just through the family tree. It's just going to tell us fathers and sons and the years of their age. Going to go through it real quick. Well, Shais kam hu yolad bein. Shais had a son. V'ikra Shmai Enosh, and he called his name Enosh. And at that time, Enosh, it was where the world really started becoming corrupt. At this son, the Noach's son Shais, and Shais' son Enosh, the world started becoming corrupt. Then people started calling items in the name of God. They started calling trees. They started naming deities that till then they all believed in God. At the time when this son is born, all of a sudden, and it's hundreds of years later, that this child is born, and then he has a son, this guy whose name is Enosh, and the world starts becoming corrupt, and they start calling physical items idols, and this where idolatry started coming to the world. Started calling them deities, and started calling them gods, and so on. Sefer, and that is where it's called, so very often we'll know it as Dor Enosh, the Dor of Enosh. That is the time where this son Enosh lived, where the world started becoming very corrupt. And now he goes in to show you the family tree. Verse 1, Zeh Sefer told us, Adam, this is the family tree. This is the generations of man. Adam, as God created man. So we're going to give you the lineage and how existence came to be, how the family tree of the whole world, the whole population came to be. We're going to go over quickly now from Adam till Noach, which is going to take us to the flood. And Adam was built with Musa Lakim. You know, Adam was built in the image of God. Asa is how God made him. And Rashi says there's a lot of commentaries on here, but he's not getting into them. He's just going to give you the simple meaning and so on. Now, another point Rashi makes, which I shared with you in previous classes, is that you should know that the children born, it's indicated in this verse that we just learned, because it says on the day that God created man, he had children, is indicated here, that as soon as Adam was born, on the first day he was born, on the sixth day of creation, that same day Adam had two children, his children, and the three girls. He had 5 children on that same day is when he impregnated his wife, and she gave birth all in one day. Those first 5 kids, the 2 boys and the 3 sisters, were all born in that first day. Zachur Keva Barais in verse 2, God created them male and female. And God blessed them. And he called them Adam, he called him Adam on the day that he was created. And he's going to give you the quick family tree. Adam was 103 years old. When he had, how old was Adam? When he had his son Shais, the 3rd child, after many years later, he was 130 years old, which means he had intimacy with his wife on the first day he was created. He sinned. He said, I don't want to have any more children, bring them to a cursed world, and so on. He went and he waited 130 years that he separated from his wife, and 130 years later, he was together with her, and he gave birth to this new son, the son called Shais. So, and Shais is going to father all the people, which is the descendants of the world, which come from Noach and so on. But he may Adam achar, and after the birth, how many years was it after he gave birth to him? 830 years. 830 years after he gave birth, which means how long did the first man live? Adam, the full amount of Adam's years, was 930 years. So Noach, Adam lived for 930 years. Now, I just want to share something interesting. Just some commentators. It came to my mind as something I've learned in the past in our Tuesday night class. And the question that arises, I thought it said that Adam will die as soon as he eats from the tree of knowledge. And he didn't die. The guy ends up living 930 years. And the reason, one of the interesting reasons given is that a day by God in a certain level of godliness is 1,000 years. And therefore, as long as Adam won't make out his full 1,000 years, he'll be punished on that. He'll be punished. It will consider to be punished on that day. Okay, so he lives 930 years. Vahi Shais. What about his son? Verse 6. Vahi Shais, and Shais was Chamishanim Umeashana, 150 years old. Enosh, and he had the son Enosh, which we know the world started becoming corrupt at the time. Verse 7. Vahi Shais Achir passed his son's birth as Enosh Sheva Shanim Ushmaina Meashana, 807 years. And during that 800, it wasn't the only child he had, but that's a child that's significant to the family tree because that's going to get us to Noah. But he had many more sons and daughters over that 807 years. So what's his total lifespan? He lived 912 years, a little bit less than his dad, who lived 930 years. But Enosh, the son, had a son called Canaan. At 90 years old, he had a child. And Enosh lived after that birth as Canaan, 815 years. But during that time, he had many more sons and daughters. Enosh, the total lifespan, verse 11, is he lived a little bit less than his father, 910 5 years. But he Canaan. And Canaan was Shivim Shana. V'yelis Mahalel. Then that son had another son at 70 years old, even younger. And he called the son Mahalel. The Canaan, and Canaan lived Achre Hilidas Mahalel Arbayim Shana 40 years. Ushmayna Meir Shana 840 years. Yehuda had many more sons and daughters. The total life of Canaan was Eser Shanim Uchami Shana 910 years, a little bit more than his father, but a little less than his grandfather. He lives for a total of 910 years. Evan, you with us? We got to scroll to verse 15. We're holding verse 15. If you could move the screen there.
Yes, sorry.
No problem. You're good. You were good till there. Good. Verse 15. Vayhi Mahalel, and this is Mahalel, Chami Shanim V'shishim Shana, 65 years old, and he had the son called Yared. Vayhi Mahalel Yared after he gave birth to the son Yared. Shloishim Shana Ushmayna Meir Shana, 830 years. We held about abundance, and he had more sons and daughters. In verse 17, Vayhi Kol Yemei Mahalel Chamesh V'tishim Shana Ushmayna Meir Shana. He was 95 years and 895 years until he died. So he lived. Vayiyerach Shtayim V'shishim Shana Umei Shana Vayoled Eschanoch. He had his son at 162 years old. He Yerach Eschanach, and after he gave birth to the son Chanach, Shmayna Meir Shana, 800 years. He had children, sons and daughters. But he called him Yared. Yared lived a grand total of Shtayim V'shishim Shana Uchami Shana, 962 years. I guess he is the longest person to live so far, 962 years. And he passed away. The Chanech, and all of a sudden we're going to have now someone who lived much shorter, had the shortest lifespan, much shorter, and Rashi is going to address that. The Chanech, and Chanech lived Chamesh V'shishim Shana, 65 years old. By Yeled Banim Babanais, I'm sorry, Yeled Shelach, and he handles Shelach. This Halech, and he all of a sudden he takes a step different from the regular family tree that he's been discussing in verse 32. And he starts describing this guy Chanech, because remember we were telling you that the world started becoming corrupt. By Yishalach bar Chanoch, and so the king was walking with God. And he lived after Mr. Shalach only Shalish Meir Shana. He died 300 years after he gave birth to his son, and he had sons and daughters during the 300 years. So his total lifespan, Shalish Meir Shana, was only 365 years old. And again he says that Chanoch, in verse 22, he walked with God. After he gave birth to his son, I'm sorry, I read the verse wrong before. The total year of Chanech in verse 23 is Chamesh V'shishim Shana, Shleish Meir Shana is 365. It was correct. Verse 24, Chanech walked with God, and he disappeared because God took him. Fascinating Rashi on this guy who passed away premature. In those days, 365 years old, I guess, was considered premature. What does Rashi say? Rashi says you should know Chanoch was a tzaddik, was a righteous man. However, he was not strong-minded. What does that mean he wasn't strong-minded? He didn't have the ability to stand up to tremendous pressure and tremendous people convincing him. So, if you're the only guy who believes in something, it's very hard to believe in it. Eventually, you start falling in line with everybody else in your society. And therefore, so God did not want him to become a Rasha, a guy who was a tzaddik. And God saw the tremendous, societal pressure that he was under. So Hashem made him die young in order that he should die as a tzaddik and he shouldn't end up passing away as a Rasha. He lived his life so nicely for 365 years, and God did him a favor by taking his life that's young. It's a very interesting idea. You see here sometimes if somebody passes away young, it could be actually to save them because God knows if they live longer, God forbid, what's going to happen. So God took him before his time. It's a fascinating idea why God would take someone before their time in order that he should die as a tzaddik and not pass away as a righteous man, as a tzaddik. Okay, Evan, we're going to go into the Shabbos portion because I don't want to miss Shabbos. So you got to go up to the top of the screen and click next. Go all the way up. Thank you, Evan, for running today's class. For those who joined later, I'm in Manhattan in my car, and Evan is our tech guy today. So thank you, Evan, very much. Wow. We're going to finish the parasha together. So we're going to finish Parashas Bereishis today. Shava Shmeinim Shana. So this guy Chanech's son lived 75 years, 170 years, and gave birth to someone called Lamech. So it's going to be 10 generations from Adam to Noach. You'll see. And after he gave birth to Lamech, he lived 782 years. And he had more sons and daughters during that time. And the total lifespan in verse 27 is Teisha B'Shishim Shana Ucham Yeshana 900. Hold on, 900 and 69 years, right? Ucham Yeshana Vayavis, and he passed away. So he lived 969 years and he died. I guess he lived the longest so far. And Lamech, his son, Shtein Mishvedim Shana, he lived for 82 years. And he had a son. And the reason he says here son, not name, he had a son, a real heavy-duty son, a good son, a son who will be the one to build the world after it will be destroyed. And that's why he doesn't just say the name. He says he had a son. He had a son because Ben also means binyan, building, boneh, and therefore it uses a term Ben, Rashi says. Vayikra Shmai Noach, verse 29, and he called the son's name Noach. Why did he give his son a name Noach? Lamar, what does Noach mean? I'm going to use Rashi's interpretation. This guy will give us rest, will give us respite from our work. From our hard toil, because everybody remembers that after Adam, God cursed the ground, and then after Cain called Abel, God cursed the ground again for taking in the blood, for hiding the blood, being an assistant to murder, and therefore God said the curse was that the ground will become terrible. The ground will be very hard to plow, and it will grow thorns, and the world was suffering tremendously at the time. And when Noach was born, Rashi says two fascinating reasons why they said that Noach will help it from the toil of their hand. First, Rashi says Noach was the inventor, was the one who invented Kli Machresha, plowing tools. He figured out how to use plowshares, and he prepared these tools. He was an inventor of these products, which brought tremendous good things to the world. It helped the world tremendously that they could plow and grow things faster. On top of that, he says the curse that God gave in the times of Adam, that the earth should be cursed, when Noach was born, it went away. That curse went away, and the world got respite from what happened. Where are we holding here? Where Lamech lived. Sorry, verse 30. And Lamech, the father of Noach, lived after his birth, Chamish V'Tishim Shana, V'Chamish Me'er Shana. He had sons and daughters. So what's the total lifespan of Lamech? Lamech Sheva V'Shishim Shana Shvami Yeshana. He lived a little bit less, 777 years, 777. He lived a total of 777 years. Lamech's father passed away. Guys, if you could mute yourselves, because Pepper has a dog barking there. It sounds like it's Mushki, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Stephen, was I right? I don't know. V'chi Lamech, V'chi Noach. So then let's talk about Noach's life. So we're starting to talk about Noach's life. Noach was Ben Chamesh Meir Shana. Noach was 500 years old when he had his first child. He has three famous sons who were going to join him on the boat, on the ark. So Rashi right away, so again, the famous character Noach, 10 generations after Adam lived. We gave you the family tree, exactly how the beginning of history started. Noach was 10 exact generations father to son from Adam and Eve. And everyone else had children we saw, right? 130 years old, 70, 65 years old. Everybody had children at a decently young age. Why was this guy a bachelor for so long? What? He couldn't get married. He couldn't find somebody to marry till he was 500 years old. Every other guy was married already long before, and they were having children. What's up with Noach? It's a fascinating Rashi that shares with you some behind the scenes to the story. He says that in those days, and today we know, you're like in law, right? You're punishable by your actions when your age to be punishable, whatever it is, 18, 21, whatever it is, you're responsible for your actions. You're not held accountable when you're a minor because you can't hold somebody accountable. In the times before the Torah was given, you could not be held accountable for your actions when you were under 100 years old. Before the Torah was given, at that point in time, in the times of Noach, the age for punishment was 100 years old, believe it or not. Well, maybe it made sense. People lived 1,000 years. So it's like 100 years old then. It was like being 10 years old today, perhaps. Anyway, so Noach knew that God was going to bring, the world knew that God was going to bring a flood. God was very angry at the world. And we'll see in a moment what was going on in the world at that time. But God was very, very upset at the world. And Noach knew that there was this promise that God was going to bring a flood and destroy the world. Noach had a very good plan. He said, look, if my children are under the age of 100, they won't. And I'm scared. What was he scared of? His kids will be influenced by this. The terrible society going on in the world at the time, right? That they'll become corrupt and they'll leave who knows what will become of them? Maybe they'll follow the world. He was strong enough to not get caught up in what was going on. But who says his children will have the strength to not get caught up in what's going on? So what he said was, I have a very good plan. My children can't be punished until 100 years old. So I know God's going to bring the flood in 100 years from now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait till I'm 500. I'm going to have my first child at 500 years old. The flood will happen. My oldest kid will still be 99 years old, and boom, my kids will be saved. They won't be punished. And that was one of the very interesting commentaries that Rashi shares, is why is Noach having children only at 500 years old and not as like everybody else at a much earlier age? That's one answer. Another answer is that Rashi brings down here that God felt that if the kids would have been righteous, there would have been a different problem. Each kid would have needed his own ark. And it would have been much more work to build an ark. Imagine Noach had to build an ark for 4 different families. Maybe you don't want to stay with your father for a full year on the cruise. So he would have had to build, whatever the reason was, he had to build one for each child. And therefore, wait till they're minors. They're still children considered minors. They'll go along. I guess you're still included in the insurance plan of your father as long as you're still a minor. And those days it was still 100, and they went on Noach with the boat. Now, one more thing. What were the names of Noach's 3 children? Shem, Cham, and Yafes. Rashi says, we know Yafes was the oldest. As it's going to say later, Yafes will be the older child. And he says, no, Shem was the greatest tzaddik, and therefore Shem was considered first in the list of counting Noach's son. Even though Shem was younger, Yafes was first because Shem was a greater tzaddik. And by the way, who does Abraham come from? Who do the Jewish people come from? We come from the son of Shem, who's named first because he was so righteous. Okay, Evan, let us continue going up and read about, we need to get to verse, 33, Lamed Gimel, or verse 1 of the new chapter 6, Vayhi, and we'll continue with the pre-flood era, what happened that Hashem was so upset. Vayhi kala, Vayhi, and it was, when man started l'roiv al pnei adama, to multiply, the world started growing and growing, and imagine people lived so long and had kids. The population was growing very fast. And they had daughters, they had girls. Part of the children was girls. But what happened with these girls? And the sons of Elokim, there's 2 ways to translate it. We're going to just use the words nobles. The sons of the nobles mean the princes, the leaders. So it's when I saw them, the daughters that were born to people. Because they were very good, they were very gorgeous, they were beautifying themselves, they were very, very beautiful. And they took these women, whoever they chose, they took whatever wife they chose. So I'm first going to explain to you Rashi's second interpretation, the simple interpretation, and then I'll share with you a very interesting interpretation. But Rashi says, what happened over here? They didn't just marry. What's wrong with the nobles marrying girls? No, they came up with a thing that that whoever they would go to a girl who was engaged, a fiancé. Was engaged to another guy, and it was time for her to get married. And they said, if you want to marry her, she first has to sleep with one of us. We first have to be with her. That was the elite, the powerful people at the time created a law. Imagine that became the law of the land. That if you wanted to marry a person, you had to submit yourself first to the people. That was the leadership. Not just was the leadership healthy, but the leadership was extremely corrupt. Imagine the society becoming so corrupt that the leadership said that the girls had to submit themselves to them. Now we're going to go much deeper. Rashi brings a very interesting interpretation here. He says that an interesting story with the angels is that God put angels to be in charge of overseeing the world, to see what's with man, what's going on with man. God put in line angels. And when Adam sinned, right, they were the ones who were supposed to be in charge and mete out punishment to Adam for sinning. And Adam sinned. And what did the angels do? They came to God and says, God, we told you this man is corrupt. Why are you making people? Angels are perfect. They're good. They're healthy. Why are you making human beings? Why are you making people? They're corrupt. They're no good. We told you never to create to begin with. We're anti the human population. Look what Adam did. He's born. He right away goes on the first day and eats from the tree of knowledge and sins. He doesn't listen to you. So God tells the angels, listen, you're such big shots. Because, sorry, I just got a call. You're talking so big because you're in heaven. That's why you're such big shots. If you would be on earth and you would have the same evil inclination, the test that man goes through, you would not just would you not fail, you would be worse. And God said, now I'm going to make a show out of it. I'm going to create angels into some form of man. I'm going to turn angels, take these powerful, huge angels, turn them into some kind of beings that they could be in this physical world, in this physical earth. And let's see what happens to you. You know what? Your guys are such big talkers. Let me see. Let's see what takes place. So what happens? And they go down to earth. And of course, they get the same test, the evil inclination and jealousy. They start feeling it, but they're much stronger than the average man, and they become corrupt. And they start forcing the girls to submit to them. It wasn't the nobles of the land; it was these mighty, giant, powerful people that now, not just were the angels, but they became corrupt and joined the crazy, dangerous things that they brought to the world. Ayomer Hashem. So verse 3, God doesn't like what the world's turning into. As I say, the world turned into ISIS at the time, right? The world turned into a horrible place. Ayomer Hashem. So God says, La yadun ruchi ba'adam. My spirit cannot rest with man. Lo olam b'shagam hu basar. How long will I keep on allowing man to do whatever he wants? This is such a corrupt society. They're allowing people to do these corrupt things. But Yom of Me'av Asim Shana, I'm giving 120 years and I'm going to destroy the world. So, God, as Rashi explains, he's like, I'm torn. God says, I have the character of compassion, and I also have the character of judgment. And I'm torn for all the life period, for hundreds of years. This is going on, right? I'm allowing it to happen. We know 130 years Noah had the child who gave birth to Enosh. So let's say it's whatever, 200 years later, the world started to become corrupt, and we're talking about hundreds of years that this is going on. And how long shall I allow this disgrace, this destruction to go on? And on one hand, as we learned in our class, so when we learned this Tuesday night a long time ago, we learned there was the prosecuting angels and the defending angels, and God constantly has to defend and stick up for the defensive angels. But how long should Hashem allow the terrible corruption that was going on? The world was like ISIS at the time. And even more so, God says, these are people of flesh and blood. They're human beings. And they don't have the decency to humble themselves before God and listen to the directions and instruction that God gives. Imagine if God created people out of fire or some kind of metal. You know, these are people live, whatever, they're just meat and bones. What are they? And they still don't listen, even being so limited. And why don't they listen to God? God says 120 years, and if not, I'm destroying the world. Now, we know that we said it was 100 years, not 120 years. We just said in the last verse that it was 100 years from when the son was born. So he says, no, the verses are not written exactly in order. You should know the Torah is not exactly, it's not a historical book, so it's not written in exactly chronological order of history, of age. So this verse happened before. God said in 120 years I'm going to bring a flood, and Noah said, okay, I'm waiting 20 more years, and then I'll have my child to make sure he's safe. All right, Evan, let's scroll up to verse 4. Let's scroll up to verse 4. Thank you. And Hanephilim hayu ba'aretz. At that time, the world was very corrupt. There were the Nephilim. The Nephilim, Rashi says, are these things that either they fell from heaven. They were these angels that fell from heaven. Or you could read the word Nephilim as they led the world's downfall. These corrupt people corrupted the world, and the world became tremendous spiral downfall. And they were massive giants. So you see, again, the Torah believed at that time that there were tremendous, massive giant creations at the world at the time. And these giants started from the time of Enosh, where the Torah told us earlier, where the world became corrupt, who was the son of Shais. So it was Noach's grandson. The third son he had at a much later time, 130 years later, had a son, Enosh, and at that time, that's when the world became corrupt. And even after that time of Noach's grandson Enosh, it kept on going. Which the sons of nobles or angels were intimate with the daughters, and we know from that intimacy what was created. They had children. Mighty children were born from the intimacy between these angels who were turned into some kind of a man, came down to earth, who had children together with the regular girls. And they kept which are renowned names, which are very famous names, became known. Rashi explains two things, few points. Number one, he says that God actually, in the times of Enosh, in Adam's grandson Enosh, God actually brought a flood to the world. It's very interesting. It wasn't just that God destroyed the whole world. He gave them some warning before Noach's times. In the time of Enosh, a few hundred years earlier, God tried already to wipe out some countries or some cities and so on, and a third of the world was wiped out. But they still didn't humble themselves. They still kept on being corrupt, and Hashem was then forced to bring a flood to wipe out the whole corrupt world that was at the time. Now they had these sons. The relationship between either the nobles or the angels and these women created these famous, strong sons that were, again, what did these powerful people do? They rose up against Hashem, and they were men of names, men of stature. What does that mean? Their names were Irad, Mechuyoel, Mesushael, and Rashi says that these famous people, these giants had names that recognize destruction. That Mechuyoel, for example, means complete destruction. Like dissolving something, and the names of these people that were given were based on, I guess, prophecy of the world was going to be destroyed from the destructiveness of these very terrible, barbaric giants that lived at the time. Vayar Hashem, and Hashem saw, this is what it says in verse 5, there is so much evil in the earth. People have become tremendously corrupt. It was like ISIS. And all of men's thoughts in their heart were just evil the whole time. You can imagine the whole world was that corrupt. And finally, God regretted that he made man, the earth and the land, and he was grieving in his heart. So obviously, a question is going to come, and this Rashi asks a very famous question that maybe is in some of your minds, and we'll tell you Rashi before you ask the question. You'll say, what does that mean? God regretted. God is infinite. God knows the future. How could he regret something? And he says, so Rashi says this story actually happened. What happened? There was a rabbi. One second, I'm sorry. Evan, could you scroll down? I think I'm missing that part of the Rashi. Let's get to the next. Keep on going. No, after verse 6. Go down to. Keep on going. Keep on going. Oh, stop. 1 second. And he says it was a story. That Rashi's saying, I guess he's saying, I'm going to write this to respond to the heretics who want to use this word to question Judaism and question Torah. There was a non-Jew who came to the great scholar Rabbi Yeshua ben Karchel, who was a scholar of the Talmud period, long time ago. And he says to the scholar, he says to Rabbi Yeshua, he says, do you not believe that God sees the future? Do you believe in your Jewish tradition that God can see what's going to happen in the future? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karchel, the great scholar, says yes. So he says, so why does it say in the Torah, in the verse we just learned, that God regretted that he made man? So here is Rabbi Yeshua's answer, very interesting answer. He says, listen, when you have a son that's born, you have a male child. Do you have a male child? He says, yeah, I got a male child. So he said, when he was born, what did you do? He says, I was happy. I made a big party for everyone. We threw a big party. So he says, why'd you throw a party? Didn't you know that your son will eventually die? Everybody dies. So he says, listen, at the party, you're happy. And then at the morning, you're sad. So he says, what? That's exactly what God did. God knew that man will be corrupt. But God said, look, some righteous people will come out of it. So that wasn't a reason not to create a world. Like, he needed to create a world to get to Noah, to get to Abraham, and so on. But the fact that God said, it's not that he knew that will happen, but right now I'm happy because the creation of man is a good thing because tremendous good things will come out of it. Oh, you're going to have a son that's going to die. Okay, we'll deal with that then at that time. Everything is in the right time. So it's not, when they say God regretted it, it's not that he regretted something he did. He was just sad at that point. He grieved is the right way to learn it. He grieved at that point in time for the sadness of what he knew would happen, but he was just sad at that point in time. Evan, is there any more? Or we're done? Yeah, let's go. Verse 7. Vayomer Hashem, last two verses. Vayomer Hashem, so God said, I'm done. Emcha, finally, the persecuting angels win. I will destroy man. Asher barased, I created me'al pnei Adam from the face of the earth. Me'adam ad behema, from man until animal, ad remes, until all reptiles, ad oifel, the birds. Hashemayim ki nechaim ki asidim, because I regret that I've made them. I'm done. I'm finished. I regret that I made them, and now we have to get rid of man. Now, Rashi says, why flood? Why was the means of why the means of a flood? Why is that the method of getting rid of the world? So he uses the term blot out man, but emcha. And he says, why? Because man is made out of earth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring water back. I'm going to get back, destroy whatever the earth formed, the man, and therefore it's going to use the expression of like blot him out, or I think dissolve him even is what is maybe one of the words too. Is going to dissolve man, put him right back in earth. I'll bring a big water. The water will break up the man and put him back in the earth. Now the next question Rashi asks, okay, I get it, man did something corrupt, but why the animals, right? Why are you destroying the animals? Why the animals do wrong? So first Rashi says something fascinating. Even the animals became corrupt. They learned from the human beings. They would have intimacy with the wrong animal, whatever, and so on. That's one way of understanding it. Therefore, they deserve punishment too. Or maybe they beyond their nature that God put installed in them. Another answer is that since the world was created for man, there's no purpose for the world anymore. So once man is not needed anymore, shouldn't be created, God will already get rid of him, destroy man too. He doesn't need them anymore. And therefore, everything else will be destroyed also. Because I regret that I made them. However, verse 8, the last verse, V'noyach matzah chen b'nei Hashem. Noach found favor in God's eyes, and he was now going to, as we're going to learn on Sunday, you'll join me, we're going to learn that the lesson on Sunday, that what happens, Hashem tells Noach to build a flood and all the details that takes place. All right. Any questions or comments? Evan, stop share for a minute. We'll see faces. I'll get to hopefully see some faces of people that are in the class. Good. I see Mitchell, Shuki, Evan, Harvey, Stephen, Irving is here. I don't see his face. Yehuda. Very nice. I see Leah's here. Eyal is here. Beautiful. David's here. And Lana's here. Good. Thank you. Any questions or comments on what we learned today? Anybody have any questions or comments on what we learned? No, I see Mitchell's itching to press the screen. I don't know. No questions or comments? Fascinating stuff. Cool story.
I do want to let you know, Rabbi. Yesterday, I heard you call my name, and my microphone wasn't working, and I felt so bad that you might have thought I was ignoring you. Okay,
I
good.
sent you a text. I saw your text. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
No worries. Don't feel bad at all.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know. David Klein, are you with us, David? David, can you hear us? Or maybe also his mic's not working, so we shouldn't assume anything. Okay. Very good. No, everybody's with us. No questions, no comments on this interesting story.
Was the flood supposed to be like a cleansing, like a mikvah of the world?
Well, spiritually, want to say that it's like a mikvah, correct. We're going to learn that next week. We're going to learn all about the flood next week. That's the whole story next. Very cool story. But we just got through, I think. So Adam obviously passed away before the flood took place, right? Did you guys follow the numbers? Did you see the family tree a little bit? So Adam, we know, lived 930 years. Now, Adam wasn't killed by the flood. So it means that the flood happened about, 1,000 years after, 1,000 years after the world was created, a very long period in time. So the time periods were really, the gap is huge. It's a huge time period. The world's only around 5,700 years. That was 1,000 years right there. When we get to Noah, we're then going to also skip. We're going to learn about the flood, and then boom, at the end of next week's Torah portion, we're going to do what we just did now, go down 10 generations to Abraham. So it's going to be 10 generations from Adam to Noah, Noah to Abraham. Then once we get to Abraham, it's going to go very, very slow. We're going to go through very slow. I have to share a joke by Eitan Gold. There's a comedian. His name is Eitan Gold. Actually, I just remembered. He says when you go to a Sephardic community, Shuki, listening, and they read the Torah, they read it in real time, like at the amount of time it takes to happen. So like, Vayered Moshe. So it's very cute. Shuki, are you here? Shomea. I can't hear you, Shuki. You're muted.
I'm here and there.
Okay, good.
I'm all over the place. I'm trying.
Okay, good. No problem. All right. So, Evan, if you could bring up the Tanya, share screen, and we'll do today's Tanya together. Evan, you're hired. You're doing an unbelievable job. This is great. You got to go. There you go. Yeesh. Okay. I know on my screen, I know what you guys, I can make it bigger. So you guys, even though Evan shares it, you could still play with it if you'd like. On your screen, make it bigger or smaller. At least on my phone, I'm able to do that. Okay, so we're going to learn today about how God gives vitality and energy to the world. All right. We learned about the word Shechina. By the way, I know Mitchell, you asked me about Shechina a long time ago. The class was on that a lot yesterday. You can go to, if you didn't hear it, you can go to yesterday's recording. They have it now on the YouTube channel. So he says that Hashem has this system, which in every world there's a level at the end of that world called Malchus. Malchus is the 10 sayings with which Hashem created the world, or the word is Shechina. And that creates the existence in that world, whatever exists, whatever he's creating. A soul on a very high level soul will be in the highest of the 4 worlds, will be in Atzilus, and so on. So today he says, Elisha b'chutzlar, it's out of Israel. What happens out of Israel? Hachayis hu al yidei yislapshus sarim chitzainim amamuinim al shivim umais. God has angels that are in charge, their managerial position, in being in charge of the 70 nations. I think it also says in Tanakh, some places like 70 angels, that each angel is in charge of a specific nation. So what happens is, in Israel, to the Jewish soul, they get this direct transmission of life, of vitality. But the world has to go through the 70 nations of the world, like we learned in our Tuesday night class. We went into detail. We're going to get to this next week, how there's going to be 70 nation offsprings after Noah. There's going to be 70 nations in the world. And Hashem creates for these nations, right? We're talking about all different nations. We're talking about the Persians and the Egyptians and the Babylonians. God will make an angel overseeing each of these nations that will come out of descendants of Noah, which is connected to the Parsha. But now back to Tanya. How does Hashem give energy and vitality and life to the 70 nations? Through, it has to go through an intermediate of these 70 angels that oversee it, Kabbalah tells. Which means a spark of the 10 sayings of God's word, the 10 sayings that God created the world. A spark came out of that. Which is out of the lowest of the 4 worlds, which even us, everyone gets energy in this physical world, comes from the 4th lowest world, which is called Asiya. And it comes from the level of Malchus, which is the 10 sayings that Hashem created the world in the lowest world of Asiya. And out of there comes a spark of light. A nitzutz, a spark of the light. And shines on these 70 angels, these managerial angels, these captains, shines to them, but not in an internal way, in a very external, superficial way. So they're not internalizing the godly energy that comes out of the level of Malchus of the 4th world. They're getting only a spark, and that spark is only not even coming into them internally, going to them externally, and those are the 70 angels which oversee and give energy and vitality to the 70 nations of the world. But it doesn't internalize in them. They get, but they do get their vitality from it, although it's not internal. It's only kind of externally getting over them. That it shines on them in a very external, superficial way. I'm trying to give you an example. I just thought of a cute idea how we can maybe give you an example. There's 2 kinds of chargers to the phone. There's the iPhone. The iPhone has 2 chargers, so maybe the Android I think also does. You can either plug in the plug and charge it directly into the phone, or the new invention is that you could put the phone directly on top of I don't know exactly how it works, and it can give battery energy to the phone. At least from my experience, the energy that the phone gets to the plug is much more internal and it's much quicker. But the energy, the way the phone gets when it picks it up from the back side of the phone through, it's a more of an external way of getting energy. So they're both getting energy, but one is like plugging in, you're getting internal, and the other way is much more external and not as quick because it's much more external way. So let's just use that as an analogy for our class. So the godly energy that would come down from the lowest world, the world of Asiya, in the lowest level of Asiya, Malchus, into the Jewish soul would come in an eternal way, like being plugged in. But the 70 angels that oversee the 70 nations get from that level, but they only get a spark, and they only get it externally, I guess, like the charger, which is being connected, not being plugged in, but they're getting the energy still from there. All right, Evan, next line. We bring the page up. Good. Now, ula aretz hagashmim, ula shemayim hagashmim, to the physical earth and the physical heavens, shemagagalim, all the spheres of our universe, right? The entire galaxies. come get their energy through these 70 nations. So they're not just in charge. The angels are not just in charge of the 70 people, but they're actually the managers over the whole, anywhere out of Israel. They're managing those countries, whatever happens, animals and the physical earth and the storms or whatever. They're overseeing they're managing what's taking place. However, he says something interesting. He's saying that even among the 70 managing angels that are overseeing the 70 nations and the countries outside Israel, there's also two kinds of energy that come off them. They have something which is called a permitted, and they have the potential to be a permitted kind of energy or a prohibited kind of energy. What does that mean? It gives you a very good example. So if pig it comes from a prohibited kind of energy, and therefore that's why we're not allowed to eat pig. So the pig gets its energy from those 70 managerial angels, and however, they get it from the prohibited part of them. A cow, let's say, for example, comes from the permitted part of the energy, which allows you to then use it for a mitzvah. You could then turn it into holy. So that the 70 nations have an energy that a Jew could then go and use, or a person could use and do a mitzvah with it and channel it and turn it into a godly and holy energy. So among the 70 angels, there is two possibilities of energy that come into the world that could be elevated and that can't be elevated, depending on how it's used or depending on how it's created. Some of it could be used for good and some of it cannot be used for good. So killing and murder and those stuff come from the prohibitive energy, which is obviously no good. I just see here, I don't know, maybe I'm not allowed to be parked here, but there is a, what's it called, truck right behind me. A cleaning truck. I better move. I don't want to get a ticket here. Sorry, guys. 1 second. Hang on 1 second. Oh, boy. Can't see where I'm going because I'm on the fog. Okay, guys, we'll leave it over here. We'll leave it Tanya here, I guess. And we'll continue, God willing, with Hashem's help on Sunday from this portion in Tanya. Have an amazing day, everyone. Have a good Shabbos.
Wonderful Shabbos, everyone.
Shalom.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom. Good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evan.
All right, thank you. No problem.